Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are doing super well. I am really pumped this week because this week marks the turning of a corner. And make no mistake about it, we are moving away from the mini assignments and we are putting everything together, right? We're going to take all of these small pieces of the puzzle that we've been working on, the learner analysis, the task analysis, the evaluation plan, the objectives, and we're going to smash all of that together in one big product. Now, let me first kind of draw an analogy. The first thing I want to talk about this morning is this upcoming holiday of Thanksgiving. Many of you are going to be celebrating Thanksgiving in the next coming days and weeks, and you'll be gathering with your friends and family and be thinking about all of the many things that we have to be thankful for. But personally, from my perspective, one of the things that I really love about this holiday season is I get to eat a lot of really outstanding food. Most of which I'm sure is very low calorie and non fat, and I won't have any problems fitting into my clothes after I eat these gargantuan meals that will be prepared, right? Now, think about this for a moment. We're going to invest an amazing amount of time in preparing our meals, right? We will have spent time going to the grocery store. We will have spent time looking at the grocery list. We will be maybe even arguing with our parents about who's going to come see who and when we're going to stay. There are going to be all of these little things that we're going to need to take care of before we actually get to the meal. But then we will get to the meal, right? There will be these succulent pies and cakes and these glamorously roasted turkeys, dressing that is just scrumptious, right? There will be roasted root vegetables and gravy and good things to drink, right? We will have spent all of this time getting all of this together, right? Well, imagine for a second what would happen if you didn't prepare your table. So you have all of this amazing food, you have all of these amazing things to eat, but you didn't actually prepare how someone is going to take advantage of what you have actually created. You have made the meal, you have done all of the little tasks that have prepared you to take advantage of that meal, but you didn't actually prepare the table so that somebody could take advantage of it. And that's the analogy we want to draw today, is setting the table for our learning. Setting the table for our learners to take full advantage of everything that we have done to prepare for them up to this point, just like a Thanksgiving meal, where we take into account our family's eating styles, right? The things that they like, the things that they don't like, the things that we know about them, things that they may be allergic to, the things that we would gather in mass because we know that people really like these kinds of things. The way that we would go about preparing that table with care and attention, right? And to think that we would leave the table undone is kind of crazy to think about that. Well, you would think, well, Brad, of course we would set the table. We would have dishes and plates. We would not just stand at the stove with a spoon and stick our fork in the turkey. We would not just kind of dig into the middle of the pie. All as exciting as that might be, we wouldn't do that. We would slide. There would be tools. There would be things that we would put in place so that we could take full advantage of actually enjoying what is before us. As we turn the corner, we want to talk about preparing our learning in a way that allows our learners to take full advantage of what we have prepared for them. So many times, and maybe you've been to workshops and seminars that have done this, right? So many times the content is there, the preparation and delivery falls flat. So we want to talk about some strategies and some ways that you might be able to do this within your own training. And then at the end of this, I want to talk very specifically about the projects that are coming up. So the first thing we want to talk about is learner related, all right? And this is a focus towards the learner. So think about preparing your instruction from a very learner related perspective. This is about using information from that learner analysis. And there are a couple of steps for this. There are a couple of things that you might just consider and think about. None of these are have-to things, but I'm just trying to get you to stretch your mind a little bit around what is possible. So the first thing you might want to do from a learner-related perspective is to identify the prerequisites. Teach the skills required to perform others first. If we were to utilize our peanut butter and jelly analogy again, we would teach the skill of opening the jar before actually putting the peanut butter on the bread. What are the skills that someone needs to know first before they do more complex or complicated skills? The second is familiarity. Begin things with the most familiar and progress to the most remote. Here are the things that we know about. Here are the things that we're not so sure about. Think about how you pile food on your plate at Thanksgiving. We get those things that we're most comfortable with. We get those things that we're most familiar with. We get a big heaping spoonful of mashed potatoes or sweet potato casserole, right? And then we might leave the roasted Brussels sprouts out towards the remote part of our plate, if you will. But begin with the most familiar and progress to the most remote. Third, teach the least difficult subject first. Why? Because it gives your learners a sense of confidence in their ability to achieve. Interest. Begin with a topic that has the most interest for the learners. Think about the idea of solving a problem, right? How do we help a learner understand that our instruction can help solve a problem and that is very interesting for them? Again, using the Thanksgiving analogy, we go to those things that we have the most interest in first. I want a big piece of turkey. I'm going to put that on my plate first, right? I'm most interested in that. Development, we want to make sure that our students are at the appropriate developmental levels. And if they're not, how do we get them up to par and up to speed with exactly where they need to be? So if we're taking a learner-related perspective to preparing our table, if you will, preparing our table for our learners, we want to identify the prerequisites, begin with the most familiar, teach the least difficult subject first, begin with topics that have interest for our learners, and ensure that students are confident in their abilities to accomplish the training through making sure they're at the appropriate developmental level. A second perspective that you might take is called the world-related perspective. And this is a focus of how objects are interrelated to the real world. Not some abstract world that we kind of make up, but really like how are these topics really kind of related? Now, if you're doing skills-based training, this may be something you want to think about. The first thing we want to consider is spatial. We want to go left to right, top to bottom, and up to down. Now, this sounds kind of crazy, but we want to think about how are we going to be asking our learners to actually move, and how are we going to ask them to manipulate things. We want to go left to right because that's natural here in the Western world, top to bottom, and then up to down. Temporal and sequential asks us to look at historically what comes first, second, third, fourth, and so on. So what are the things that seem to come first? What are the skills that we need to know absolutely first? And then what are the things that we need to know second? And then physically, looking at large to small, soft to hard, light to dark. Now, you might be able to come up with your own version of some of these, right? But you can see the way that we don't move right to down or left to up. We move left to right, top to bottom, and down. We don't start with the second thing and then go to the first thing. We don't start with something small and then go to something dark, right? But you can see how spatially, physically, and temporally these things all kind of work together. And the third way that we might think of this is called concept related. Now, this is a focus of how concepts are related to systems or a specific phenomena. There are four kinds of things to think about with this. Class relations, which teaches characteristics of a class before teaching members of the class. So we teach the characteristics of something before we teach the actual phenomena or the system of something, right? So think about, we learn our numbers before we learn addition, right? We learn our numbers before we learn subtraction and division. It would be very difficult to teach the concept of division if we didn't first know what actually 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on actually mean, right? Second is propositional relations. Here, we provide an example first and then the proposition. So we might provide an example of something, for example, a turkey dinner, and then the proposition, which would be setting the table for our learners. So there's a propositional relation. It's kind of setting up the analogy to then turn the corner so that there's some kind of sense making for our learning. The third is sophistication. We want to begin with concrete or simple and then progress to abstract and complex. Now, think about the way that we might explain different kinds of phenomena. We want to, again, make sure that people know that there's something very concrete about what they're learning. There's something simple, and they're putting simple steps together. And then we move to very abstract and complex constructs. Fourth is logical prerequisite. We teach logical steps first and then concepts before complicated procedures. Again, I think this makes intuitive sense in terms of the idea of sophistication as well. Looking at simple things that then go to complex, we teach logical steps first before we look at complicated procedures. So you might be thinking like, well, how does all of this kind of fit together? So this is very interesting, but tell me a little bit more about how all this kind of fits. We kind of fit this all together under this theory of elaboration. We call this elaboration theory sequencing, and we have two real areas with it. Now, again, please don't hear me saying that you have to set your training up like this. I'm just trying to give some thoughts and some ideas about things that you might actually consider as you prepare the table for your learners. So the first is content expertise, So you may be setting your table from a content perspective, using some of the classification systems that we talked about previously. Content expertise presents a logical sequence of content similar to what one might use to discover an idea and use knowledge and practical application. Think about this class, right? So we present a logical sequence of content. So we started with the needs analysis, and then we went to the learner and the context analysis, and then we went to the task analysis, and then the learning objectives, and then the evaluation plan, and then now we're beginning to develop this kind of end of the year hat project, right? So we present a logical sequence of content that builds on top of one another. We apply that knowledge in practical application, and then we present this kind of big project towards the end. The second phenomena here is the task expertise. Now, this presents task-related information from simplest to more complex. It's very complementary to some of the past perspectives that we just talked about. So think about, are you using a content expertise? Are you using a task expertise? Or maybe even there's a knowledge expertise where you're asking people to master some level of knowledge. Now, I think a fair question would be here, well, how do you actually set this up? And I would use this diagram here to highlight how you might do something like that. When I do training out in the real world, I always do some kind of stage setting or warm up. I present a problem, or I present a question, or a situation or scenario to my learners in a way that sets the stage for what is to come. It's the initial hook of what is actually going to be in that content. And then I present some kind of concrete experience where I give them some facts or some knowledge, or I let them try something out that's very, very concrete. And then we begin to progress through the concrete experience to what happened. And then, well, why does that matter? And then we reflect on that. And we constantly are in this cycle of repetition. You might notice this cycle as the Kolb learning cycle. This probably looks familiar with you. You might draw on some of your ELF 300 experience as a means to really master what it means to provide your learners a concrete experience, then a what happened, a so what, and then a now what. And this, again, just directly maps on the Kolb's learning cycle. So if I was going to list out some specific points for this, here's what I would recommend for you. In terms of setting the stage as a sequencing method, I would encourage you to think about an appropriate warm-up, an appropriate icebreaker, really spending time setting the table and getting your learners ready to take advantage of what is to come. That fantastic knowledge that you've developed that is unique to your learning instructional event, right? And spend time really preparing the table, helping them understand how your instruction can solve a problem, how your instruction can raise their status, or how your instruction can provide meaningful, very contextual development for them. This is about activating and honoring the experience that adults bring into the room. And we know, and we've all been in situations like this, where the table never gets set. Ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that the first couple of minutes of any instructional event is the most important. It determines whether or not people are going to be snoozing in the back of your class, right? Or whether they're going to be on the edge of their seats, really excited to take advantage of what you have to offer them, this very exciting knowledge that you have to offer them. So I want you to think about setting the table and sequencing your instruction appropriately so that your learners can take full advantage of the time, care, uh, and the dedication that you've had to developing this content for them. Now, let's turn another corner here and let's talk about what you can expect or what I can expect from you in the coming weeks. There are two real projects here. The first is a 4-hour training module and presentation, and the second is a 4-hour training plan. I'm going to develop another video here in the next couple of minutes to talk a little bit more about these very specifically. So we'll wrap this up here, and then we'll come back to talk about this 4-hour training module and presentation and the 4-hour training plan. I hope that you have really gained some insight and some knowledge, and I've been able to stretch your thinking about how you set the table. Last thing I'll say, I hope you guys have a fantastic Thanksgiving and you enjoy your friends and family. And as you sit down to develop to enjoy your meal, think about the time and care that went into setting that table, and draw the analogy into your own instruction. How do we design and set the table appropriately for our learners in our own instructional events? Be well. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.